Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Japalang Film Podcast. I'm your host, Sepeng. We also have co-host and film director Jonathan Chu. Our guest today is Sarah American. She's a film critic, journalist, and researcher, and she has written for The Hollywood Reporter, Sight and Sound, Telegraph, and Forbes. She's also currently doing her master's degree in film and screen studies at the University of Cambridge. Welcome to the pod, Sarah.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Just for some background for our listeners, right? Sarah and I first met each other way back in 2015 when we were both at the Singapore International Film Festival's Youth Jury Critics Program. Do you remember?
Yeah, I definitely do.
Maybe you could just give us a quick intro, right? Like obviously, we just mentioned a bunch of very high profile publications that you write for. Yeah, tell us more about what you write about and how you got started writing for them.
Yeah, I don't know whether you remember Sepeng, but remember Maggie Lee was like our mentor during YGCP our year.
Yes.
Yeah, so I
Yes.
think at the time she was like the chief Asia critic for Variety, and like I didn't know what that was then because this was like right after JC. But I think it really dawned on me that I see someone who is getting paid to write, and that like clicked. And I think because of that, I feel myself like gravitating towards writing for like trade publications. So like THR, Deadline. I feel myself gravitating there. I think it was partly because of that program. I'm still very glad that the program is running today. I managed to meet this year's batch at the festival last year. So yeah.
Did you speak with Maggie that time in 2015?
I don't remember, but remember they did like a one-on-one consultation, and I remember she was sitting on like a beanbag. But I think I felt
Uh-huh.
intimidated to talk at that time. I was just like, sure, read my article, tell me how it's bad. Yeah. But I think it was just very nice I think that what I took away was that community, like even people like yourself. And, I remember you had Brandon on the podcast as well, right? And he was in our batch as
Yeah.
well. And I think, yeah, that, I think it was just a very good community because writing is actually, like watching a film is quite, solitary sometimes. You're just processing it on your own. And sometimes writing is also very solitary because it's just you and the computer. But what the program provided was that sort of community, and the sense that we could like talk about films in a way that sometimes was very critical, but also like, I would say quite productive as well. Yeah.
So was it during the program that you kind of decided, hey, I want to be a film writer, film critic, film journalist?
It's hard to sort of walk away with that just because you see the lack of opportunities here. But I would say two things sort of stood out. Number one was getting connected with the people at Cindy, so like meeting Alphonse there,
Mm.
and they provided a lot of opportunities to all the alumni to at least continue writing. Because I remember after that writing some stuff related to like the Asian Film Archive and other people's short films and all that. So I think number one, having an outlet after the program was very, very helpful. And I mean, it did stir something in me. Like I felt that I quite like writing about film because I was, that year I had like done a bit of like PA work on film sets, and it was a good experience, but I didn't feel like that was my calling then. And like film journalism and criticism felt, something that I could, you know, I wanted to work on. And so the second thing was, I remember Wei Jie, who was the coordinator then, telling us about this program at the Far East Film Festival in Udine, Italy, that we could apply for the following year. So he told all the alumni that, and that program also like really, I think, cemented my interest in going down this path.
What actually inspired you to sign up for the SGIF Young Critics program at that point? Because you mentioned you were still at JC.
Yeah, no, it was the year after I graduated JC. Yeah, and I was like, I mean, I knew I really liked film. My favorite subject in school was literature. So I guess film was is the way people are talking to each other now in terms of what we watch and how we connect with others and the debates that people sort of involve themselves with. Um, but I think what made me sign, I think I probably saw a Facebook post and it looked kind of cool, but there wasn't a lot of information on it yet because our batch was like the second batch since the festival restarted. So I think it was more like, I was in a space of like wanting to try new things. So it was like, I did some PA work, and this felt like another thing in film I could get involved with. So yeah.
And you went to the US to study English and cinema studies. And during that time, I believe you did this Pen in Cannes International Cinema Program. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. What was that about? Was that like a writing program?
Not really. It was like a 4 credit course. And like everyone wants to be like a film major. Everyone sort of wants to apply to that program, and I was actually on the wait list like the first round. But I was like, I'm still a freshman. I can apply next year. But I think I got off the wait list, and yeah, it was. You have to write, I think, like 3 papers related to like some of the films there, and I mean, there's like a professor coordinating the program and all that. Um, yeah, but actually the cool thing is I heard about this program, and I heard about the University of Pennsylvania, so the school that I went to, actually because of someone from the YJCP program. Do you remember like there was a Cass, or there was someone in our batch? She was like an exchange student to NUS, but she was from that
Oh
university.
yeah,
Yeah, so
yeah,
there's
Cassidy. Yeah.
there was an SGIF link to it.
Oh, okay,
I was
okay.
like, oh, I'll apply to this uni. Yeah, so
Wow.
yeah, it
Right,
was
right.
yeah, so I really wanted to go on that program, and after that program, I think I watched like maybe 40 films at the festival, and after that, I declared the film major. Yeah,
I see. And then during your university days, you also interned at the Hollywood Reporter, which I guess is where your professional journey started. Like, tell us like how was the whole experience there?
yeah, it was a really, really great experience. Like just being in LA for the first time, and being trained by some of the most experienced reporters in the business. I think at the start of the program, because I did it for about 2 months. At the start of the program, you're basically like they give the interns transcription, so we're just transcribing, 40-minute interviews that other journalists in the newsroom have done, and I guess you can see it as like grunt work, right? But through like sort of listening, you also learn how people ask questions, how people craft the flow of questions, so that you can ask the difficult questions halfway through. You can see how sometimes PRs work, and how they try and step in and like protect their subjects, and how a journalist should negotiate that. So I think those things, like by listening, were very, very helpful, and I feel like now I draw so much from that experience. And at the same time, like after a while, they will, when you get your bearings on the newsroom, you're allowed to like pitch stories to like certain editors, and because every morning we'll sit in this meeting where they sort of talk about the stories for the day, and the editor in chief is usually there, like adding his point of view and all that. And then you sort of find editors that you want to work with. And yeah, so I got a few opportunities to write after that. They'll usually send the interns to the red carpets as well. So you just sit there, and it's quite a high pressure environment because you don't know which cast will stop and talk to you. It's very competitive.
Mm.
Like most of the time, like THR, you're next to like Variety, and there's a little like tension there, because they used to be owners as well. So yeah, it was pretty competitive, but I really appreciated the chance that they gave to the interns to really like learn trial by fire. They didn't like cuddle us and give us a nice like sofa to rest on. It's like you really have to be at the forefront, and I mean up to today, I still draw so much from those few months there.
Yeah, I mean because we rarely get to interview someone who has some association with the Hollywood Reporter. Can you just help paint us a picture of what is it like to work there? Like what's the office like? How many people are there? You know, who are some of your colleagues?
Yeah, I can't exactly remember how many people were in the newsroom. But I remember there were like maybe 8 or 9 of us interns, and they were all American. I was only international. Um, yeah, I think there are like maybe 200 reporters, but you also meet other staff, right? There are people on the sales side. There are people who do copy, so they will just look through, see if there are any errors, grammar. There are social media people as well. So the newsroom is quite big. I do remember. So I remember working with this editor. She's still at THR. Named Rebecca Sun, and she like mentored me quite a bit and, gave me a lot of context that I could reach out to while writing articles. And I really appreciate it. And she sat next to me while editing, so I could see what edits she made. And through that, you sort of learn how to write better as well, because editing is a form of writing in some ways. Yeah, but I think they since moved office. But I remember we were, yeah, in a very nice, quite a nice area, and there was like a very beautiful view of the office. I remember seeing like mountains.
So what's your day to day like in
Mm.
THR?
In THR, so I think the internship they only offered it 3 days a week in the office, so you had like 2 days off. It wasn't full time. Because I think the only one that also offered was Variety, but they only offered a minimum of 6 months for the internship, which is like longer than our summer break. So I couldn't do that. So I applied to THR. So it's 3 times a week. So in the morning, you usually have to go for that big news sort of gathering where all the reporters and all that will sit in the room with the editor in chief, and they sort of go one by one, beat by beat, film, TV, international. There's someone who's on the talent agency's beat. There's someone on the legal beat. Everyone will sort of pitch their stories. Sometimes if there's like a certain tension or blowback, that will be a source of discussion during the interview. And I mean, all of us interns were just sitting at the corner, like just trying to absorb everything. Yeah, and then one thing I really appreciated was, so the for the interns they organized a lot of like chats between different editors. So the editor will sit with a bunch of us interns, and we will have an hour to like talk to them. So we got to talk to most editors who work there. The people who run um the beat that looks after all the Marvel and superhero stuff. We got to talk to them, and then we got to talk to people who look after the talent agencies. We got to talk to people looking after legal and diversity and things like that. So I then learn more about their beat, how to pitch to them, what stories they're looking for, how they do their work. So I really appreciated that. Even with the editor in chief, they gave us an hour with him to like talk as well. So I think that was a really good feature of the program.
And just now you said even till today you still employ some of the lessons you learned from
Yeah.
your internship at THR. Like
Yeah.
what are some of these like lessons that you learned?
I think it's just learning to navigate the industry, because things like writing and interviewing, you can learn it in school, you can learn it through like student newspapers, but just learning how the industry works, how to deal with like PR sometimes, how to do red carpets, um, yeah, learning how to, move within a newsroom and identify stories. I think those are the things that I think I still draw from. Yeah.
So
Oh, wait, and I wanted to add something. I think one thing that was really important at the time, I remember. So when I joined in summer of 2019, this was also just after I think all the Me Too sort of things started, and I remember a THR recently had this report on, I think, the Warner Brothers CEO for sexual misdemeanors, and he got fired after that report came out. And I was like surprised. I was like, oh my goodness, like you always have this idea that entertainment journalism is talking to celebrities and all that, but I sort of absorbed this idea that serious journalism sort of puts pressure on the industry, asks the difficult questions, and acts as a form of check and balance. That sort of fourth estate on the industry, and that's very different from what a lifestyle publication does. It's very, very different. So I think that was something that really has stuck with me today, and sort of that sort of moral compass that I want to strive for.
and when you finished the internship, what kind of plans did you have for your future?
Yeah, I
Like,
mean,
like after you finish the internship, did you decide, okay, this is really what I want to do after I graduate?
yeah, I mean, I knew I needed to come back to Singapore, but I wanted to like sort of keep the door open in terms of like freelance. So I remember talking to the editor there who looks after international, because if there's anyone I would work with, it would be him, and he's still there. So we sort of kept in touch, exchanged contacts, and then I think there was like the first time I wrote for them was only like in 2022. That was the first chance, and I had been like talking to them for a few, for the years preceding that, but I think there was an ownership change, and then there was COVID, so I think there were a lot of issues with budget and what the future would look like for the international beat. But I think I just kept, the conversations going, and that sort of led to the opportunities that I got in 2022 and last year as well.
So you started writing for them in 2022, and when was your internship? Which year was it?
2019, so it was 3 years.
Wow. Oh.
3 years before I got any work from them. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, well done on keeping the connection there.
Yeah. I mean, in between, I did some freelance stuff for Fox as well. So I think one thing I took away from THR, I remember all the editors, they would tell us like get on Twitter, like use Twitter, and I was just like, like I don't really know, like I don't really know whether I want to be there. But it was very funny because when I came back, so I graduated in 2020 and then came back to Singapore, COVID and all that, and then I was on Twitter. And that's where I saw there was like a call out when they were like looking for people to write for Forbes. And, like it just so happened they were trying to expand like the coverage on Asian cinema. So yeah, like it was quite an easy sort of transition because at THR you're already like covering business, having a very like and Forbes also, their bread and butter is, the business, even for the entertainment beat. So I think it was a very easy transition, writing for THR and then like Forbes. Yeah.
What's the difference like between writing in these two publications?
I think with Forbes there's still a bit more leeway to do like softer pieces, like more featurey kind of voices, doing like interviews, being a bit more playful with your prose. But I think for THR, sometimes like the first paragraph if it's a very newsy sort of story, yeah, most of the time you will have to, like the writing is a lot more straightforward. The most important news has to be in the first paragraph, then the second, and all that. But I mean, there are articles in THR that are pretty like, playful with the prose as well. So I think it was just hard, like learning to move out of a newsroom and to like just doing it by myself. Like I mean, setting up interviews on my own. Like no one was doing it before me.
Right.
So I think it was hard. Like what do I cover? Like which region? Like Asia is so big, and like it was cinema and TV. Like, and there's so much I could cover. Like, do I cover a Thai indie film or do I cover a Korean,
Right.
drama on Netflix? Like it was just like I had to like define it for myself. And I think that was hard at the start because in the newsroom, like if you need to talk to someone, one of the editors or journalists will be like, hey, this person would be good to talk to. Here's their email. And then whereas here I have to like sort of, start, sending cold emails, start asking people to introduce me to other people. So I think that was the year where I was also like programming for SGIFF. So at least through that, you're already sort of embedded in the film community and they would like, and I mean, the Singapore film community, most people will like be very, very willing to help others. So yeah, I'm very appreciative of that.
Yeah, it's quite fortunate. While, for example, if you are doing something like programming, at least like you have a pulse of what's going on, and that could kind of like give you a bit of a directive into what you can write on there.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, a lot of film critics are film programmers as well and vice versa, just because they complement each other so well. And I think someone told me then that like film programming is a form of like criticism sometimes. It's just a public form of film criticism in the sense that you're looking at themes. You're trying to, when you sort of put together a program, you're thinking about how they sort of work with each other. When you're putting together a short film program and choosing which 4 films to put in the same group, in the same screening, you're also practicing the same sort of skills. It's just that, instead of an article, you have, a program. Yeah.
I don't know if you would remember this, but if I'm not wrong, your first article for Forbes is about top Asian film markets.
Sorry,
and you wrote about the title of your first article for Forbes is Top Asian Film Markets Wrap Up Project Funding and Sales. Do you remember?
No, I think my first one was something about, the Korean film that was filming in Jordan. I think that was the first one because that was my trial article with them before they like actually wanted me. I think that was the first one.
Oh.
I remember the Jordan one very clearly. Maybe like
Okay.
Yeah, maybe the page you're looking at. Sometimes there's some weird thing with the chronology, but I remember my very first one was this Korean film that I think Lee Byung-hun was in, but it was like filming in Jordan. Yeah, and then there was all sorts of like COVID. It was very related to COVID. I remember that was my first one. Yeah. Then
I
after that, they're
see.
like, yeah, sure, we want you. It was like a trial, so
The
Nice.
negotiations, right?
yeah,
The
yes,
film. Yeah.
yeah.
And you also write for, I think, one of our favorite film magazines, which is Sight and Sound. How did you land that gig?
That was a cold email. So yeah, I think with these things, sometimes you just have to like. I mean, I usually use this philosophy. It's called spray and pray. So
Hmm.
you just see who replies you. Yeah, and there was an editor there who was actually covering someone who was on maternity leave, and he replied my email. I didn't have never met him, and he sort of yeah allowed me to write that first article, and I guess we just kept the conversation going. So whenever I see a film that I like or want to write about, then I will like reach out to him again. So I think I got managed to do a few reviews for him, but he's no longer there. Yeah.
Can I ask for Sight and Sound, when it comes to the writing criteria, do they have like certain ways they kind of request for you to write? Because from my knowledge of reading Sight and Sound, and there's like around, I think, 15 years ago,
Yeah.
the
Wow.
reviews, right, it's quite long, and it's very detailed, and they go into specifics. It's quite chim,
Yeah.
so it's definitely very different from, say, a variety article.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
almost like a film essay almost. So
Yeah.
so did they kind of like request that from you?
Yeah. Do you read the print one or the digital?
Print.
Ah, nice.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it was quite a steep learning curve. Like I had a lot of comments on my first review, like the draft. And I was like, this is what I'm not
Oh
doing right.
no.
Yeah. But but I think it was very helpful. So I think they really, really focused on like that sort of links towards the historical context of the
Yep.
film or other films that author or like director has done, or if it references, a specific movement or trend in that sort of space. I think that always needs to be brought out. It's very helpful if you've watched like 2 or 3 of that filmmakers' other works as well, and not talk about the film just in isolation. I think that's why I'm very picky about the films that I choose to write about for them, because it's like if I feel like if I add beyond the film, that means I can't write it for Sight and Sound, because they have a very cinephilic sort of audience, and like I came to the publication as a cinephile as well, and I wanted to write for them because I knew that it's a space that protects cinephiles and cinema and film criticism. So yeah, I'm quite like picky about what films I pitch to them, because I just want to do a good job.
Right.
Yeah, so like for example, I wrote about one of the Japanese films and talking about like family, and how there was this trend among Japanese filmmakers talking about that sort of like almost nuclear but not quite nuclear kind of families. So yeah, I felt that okay, I could situate like this film, I think it was called Love Life. It was at Venice. I could situate that film within this larger context. So if I feel like I can't do that with a certain film, I won't write about it for Sight and Sound.
Yeah, I remember when I
Yes.
first read Sight and Sound. I read through the review, and I was like, so did the writer like the film or not? So that was my first thing. Then after I realized, oh, okay, this is film criticism.
Yeah,
it's writing about it rather than what you.
Yeah, I would say some of the reviews, maybe because I'm still quite junior, I don't get to write the super long reviews. I think the longest I've written for them is about like 800 words. Yeah, but even to write 800 words for them takes me like twice as long compared to like writing an 800 word article for someone else.
Yep.
Just because like each word, each sentence has to be crafted almost so artistically. But I like that challenge. I feel like it's very stimulating. And I think they've done a very good job in trying to expand the number, the diversity of writers that they get. They publish the entire pitch guide on their website. The rate that they pay writers is completely public on the website. So that sort of transparency, for each section, which editor to reach out to, is something that,
Wow.
it's very progressive in the industry. Yeah. So like anyone who's like listening to this, you can like just Google Sight and Sound pitch guide and then try to get a reply. Yeah, but they tell you what they're looking for, what they're not looking for. So I think that's very like forward minded of them.
Right. Yeah.
Since they're already quite transparent. Can you just roughly share, for example, for a review, how much do they pay?
I don't know the exact like cents. I forgot. But usually I think for like a 700-word review, it's about like £120, I think. It works out to around that. Yeah, so pounds convert to SGD is slightly more.
Yeah.
I mean, it's about 1.5, 1.6. Yeah, so that's roughly the amount they pay. Like, usually I find film criticism, you don't get paid that well compared to film journalism. Yeah, because if you write for the trades and all that, you can sometimes get $1 a word if it's in print. There's this, but if it goes on digital, like the rate's a lot lower,
Right.
and it's quite an archaic sort of practice because nowadays, like whatever's in print also gets posted online in a few, like a week after publication or something. So it's still sort of a relic of the past, I guess, in this sort of practice in news.
Can you just talk about one of the reviews that you wrote for Sight and Sound? So it's about the Japanese film Plan 75, which I've seen and love. Maybe you could just roughly talk about what the film is about and how did you go about writing about this film?
Yeah, so I mean the film is sort of set in this like fictional world where at 75 you can decide whether to sort of, die, I guess. And then the state sort of
Yeah.
covers your expenses, and then they do it in a very like bureaucratic way, like reassure you. And then there are a bunch of elderly there who sort of are brought together by this program. Yeah, so I got a screen. So I watched it on a screener, which is honestly like not the best way to watch a film, but that's the reality of most film journalism and criticism these days is that you just watch screeners because, sometimes it's pre-release and all that. Yeah, and I was very moved. It was very sobering.
Mm.
Yeah, and I think there was a lot of heart in the film. So I think for me, my writing process is I don't try and start at the introduction because then you'll like be stuck there forever. So I think I find one image or one scene or one line of dialogue that feels like an entry point to writing a review, and then I start from there, and then the article sort of grows out from there.
Right.
I feel like that's my process, so that I don't get stuck, and I just write. Like the first draft will always be terrible, but it's just getting the words on the page, and then after that, then I tidy it up, look through it again, and then I send it back to the editor. The editor looks through it, leaves comments, then I sort of look at the comments, rewrite some parts, push back on some parts, explain some parts, sometimes change the word choice, things like that, and then send it back again. And usually after maybe the second draft, usually that's sort of the form that it will be published in. What do you think about the film?
Oh, I love the film. I think it's a especially relevant film for Japan because, as we all know, their society is an aging population, and this sci-fi notion of this opt-in euthanasia program for the Japanese elderly, it's because the problem is so real. This film depicts this alternate future. You could foresee it actually coming true, and that's what's so horrifying about the film. Yeah. And it really makes you question if this is what if this euthanasia program is good, or I think why it's so powerful is because knowing the Japanese psyche, they have this sense of duty towards the community. So in the film, some people voluntarily choose to euthanize themselves, and knowing this is how Japanese people actually think, and they have this sense of duty, it's so conceivable that this kind of future depicted in the film could come true. and that's what I find so like horrifying and so at the same time so powerful about this film. Yeah. And also my lecturer, my Japanese cinematography lecturer, he shot the film. So for me there are many reasons to love this film. You also write for The Telegraph, which is a UK broadsheet. Is that a correct way to describe it? Yeah.
Yeah.
How is that experience? Because you've written for UK publications, and one of the top US trades. Like, what's the difference between working for the British and working for the Americans?
I mean, for me, it's just learning to like move between American spelling and British spelling very quickly. And the punctuation is different. That's the most shocking thing. Like, the punctuation is different. So, like, especially with the full stops, like, for American English, like, everything's usually inside all the quotes and all that. Whereas, like, sometimes even if you're, using that single sort of quote, you can put the full stop outside. But for American English, everything has to be inside. Yeah, so sometimes it's a bit interesting that way. And like the American English uses, I feel like they like active voice a lot more than the British. Like little things like that. I don't know. It's hard to compare because a broadsheet versus a trade does very different things, serves very different audiences. It's looking for very different topics. But I would say that the Telegraph piece was also pretty unexpected. So I think. So I did that when I was at the Venice Film Festival. So I was at the Venice Film Festival as part of Fabreschi. They had they have a jury there, so I applied to the jury and got to sort of serve as a jury for the Horizonte sort of section, looking at first and second features. And then besides writing about film and all that, and this is something that like one of the mentors that I met at the Far East Film Festival, he's a great guy. Taught me is that when you're at a film festival, don't just look for film stories, because there's like cafes that people hang out at. There are restaurants that studios throw parties at for celebrities. There's so many ways you can talk about how film festivals relate to the economy of the city, or questions of institutions and historical sort of places that a film festival is situated in. And actually, he gave me the idea for the Telegraph one, where he was like, "Hey, by the way, do you know there's this like island that's next to the Lido is where the Venice Film Festival is at. It's not actually in Venice; it's on Lido Island. And then there's this other island down that used to serve as the quarantine island like centuries ago, like during the Black Plague and all that kind of stuff." And he was like, "That might be an interesting story to do. Like, no one has written much about it yet, and like." Thousands of people, and even the word quarantine, it came from Italian. Like, I think it's quarantine because I think it meant 40 days. That's why you have the quar in it. So the island was like, the island is at sort of this entry point if ships are going to Venice. So that was the best place to sort of stop ships, like sanitize all the goods, and then put the crew there for 40 days, make sure they weren't carrying disease before they were allowed onwards into Venice. So I think there was all these stories there, and then I like reached out to like the Archaeological Association in Venice, and then like someone replied, and actually she's like the daughter of one of the people who like care so much about this island and is trying to like fight for its preservation and all that. Yeah, and then they brought me to the island on that like little boat. It sounds a bit wild.
Wow.
I was like, wow, journalism, adventure. This is what I signed up for.
Yeah.
This is my first. Yeah, and then you sort of like walk through all the ruins and all that, and I thought that was interesting. So I pitched it to the travel section of Telegraph, because I think one thing I learned from that. So his name is Matthew. He coordinates that program at the Far East Film Festival. I think he sort of gave very good advice, and like during a film festival, everyone's pitching. I mean, before that, everyone's pitching to film editors and trying to get pictures accepted. But if you move sideways and you learn to move sideways, like food, the food beat, the travel beat, and all that, and you pitch this idea about a film festival, like for them, it's like wow, like because there's traction, because it's timely, and yet they're not swarmed by like pitches. So I think that was, and at the same time, you can expand your portfolio. You're not just a film writer, a TV writer. You can say, oh, I can write about food now. I can write about travel. You have all these sort of you expand your portfolio. So I think that was like something that I learned. And actually, it just so happened that the Venice Film Festival had also put one of their like that immersive section, so the part that immersive cinema on one of those islands as well, that they were looking that the Archaeological Association was looking after. So there was a nice sort of like segue into like the film festival. But yeah, that was a bit of an adventure.
Just now you mentioned you went to Venice as part of the Fipresci like crew. For our listeners who might not know what or who Fipresci is, can you just roughly explain and share with us how did you become a jury member?
Yeah, so Fipresci is like the International Federation of Film Critics. There's a French name for it, which is why it's FIPRESCI. I'm not going to attempt it, but it's in French. And I think I applied to them at the start of maybe 2022. I think it's because, like in Singapore, you don't really get any formal sort of membership or association. There's no like local critics association and all that. And I was sort of like I really wanted to be part of a community in some ways, because through a community, through a established association like Fipresci, you have access to resources and a network. And I mean, they cover accommodation, so money. Yeah. So that's like, yeah. So if you like, it differs for every festival. Like some festivals, like Cannes and Berlin, they have a lot of agreements with different festivals, and the terms are all very different. So some festivals that you go as a Fipresci jury, you can get flights, and accommodation covered. But with Fipresci, for Venice, it was just accommodation, which is like great because the Lido is expensive. And then so through them, then internally, once you get accepted, I think you have to prove that you at least have a year of like paid work in film criticism or journalism, and that you don't work in like film production and all that. If not, there's a conflict of interest. So I think you have to apply. I heard that quite quickly. They're pretty fast. I think within 3 weeks, I became part of them, and then you get access to some of their resources, and then through that, they will like let you know which juries are up for application. I think there are maybe about 80 a year. Yeah, and I guess I always wanted to go to the Venice Film Festival, so yeah, I applied for that one. And I mean, there are 2 juries for that. So there's a main jury, which is usually senior critics and journalists who cover the main section, the main competition. And then I applied for the sidebar because that's they're looking for younger critics and journalists for the. Yeah, so there was like 3 in the main, and then main competition, and 3 jurors for the sidebar. And then, yeah, it was a very nice experience. Got to meet other film critics, and it's just such a luxury these days to just sit around and like talk about films, right? Like, we like this film more, this, or maybe because we had to decide who to give the award to. And I think it's a luxury because most of the time you're on deadline, right? Like, you have to write articles, you make this churn of like watch film, write article, publish, then pitch again. And I think that Fipresci sort of has protected the space of giving you the luxury to just talk about films, the merits, and like the merits of certain films, why it's important to give an award to this particular film and all that. And I was actually very happy that our jury, we gave the award, the Fipresci Award, to Autobiography that year.
Right.
So yeah, and it was like amazing as well. And then you give it a small little ceremony alongside other like sidebars of awards. And it was like at a tennis club. So the background for like a lot of the photos was like a tennis court. Yeah, so
can you share a bit about the decision process? Like how did Autobiography ended up being the final choice? Like what was the deliberation like?
Everyone was like very civil, and no one got into like fist fights over it. So I think it was we already, because we focused on first and second features in the sidebar sections at Venice. That's sort of like the reach of the award that we were giving out. So we already like drop a schedule, we already make a list of the films we have to see, and then we have maybe like 3 formal meetings where we sit and like really talk about it. But the whole time at the festival, because most of the time we're at the same screenings, we'll talk about the films as they go because we don't want to leave everything to the last day. If not, there's a bit of like recency bias sometimes. So we were like, every 2 films, we were like bump into each other, because it's just three of us. So and then we'll just talk about the film, like, okay, this one yes, this one second, this one maybe. So we start to put them into like pools, right? And then when we see another 2 or 3 more films, we adjust those pools and then like WhatsApp it to each other sometimes. But we had like 2 or 3 like sort of formal meetings where we sit face to face and like go through the films, like what you liked about it, what you didn't like. Okay, this one's completely out of the running, and okay, maybe for these 3 films we'll leave it to the last day to talk about.
Right.
So I think that was like our process.
Right.
And who was tied with autobiography? Like the final 2 choices?
I can't say. Right. Yeah, but I mean, it was. I think autobiography was like pretty unanimous. Like we decided, like our discussions ended way earlier compared to like the main competition sort of jury. We were like, yep. And then like we gave the award to like Makbul and his team. So it was very nice to like hang out with them as well. After that.
Yeah, could you share what is it about autobiography that led to you guys electing it to win the Friparsky Award?
Yeah, I think for me, I was actually very hesitant in discussions to like say too much because I'm the other 2 jury members were both Europeans, so I was like I wanted to hear what they saw in this film because maybe I know like cultural context and historical context that they might not know, and that influences my viewing. So I think it was quite interesting that they took away almost similar things that I took away,
Right.
and I think that speaks to the sort of strength of the film and how universal its themes are. I mean, I love the idea of that sort of political and the idea of like power playing out within a household, right? It's not super complicated. You're not having these like sweeping shots of like institutions and like mass riots or anything. It's just a house, and yet there's this sort of subtle tension and power that comes in that space, and of course it's like quite dark, but I think everything felt right. Like the pacing felt right, the performances felt right, the dialogue was strong. So I think all these things sort of added to this this film's sort of award, sort of argument for them to get an award, because other films, we would like maybe the theme, but a certain performance will let us down, or it's too long, or it's too slow. And so I think this was it just felt whole. And there were like very few faults we could find with it. Yeah.
I really enjoyed the film as well. I think like you said, putting theme aside, or like what this film is about and everything. I think one thing about autobiography is that it's a film about tension, and the tension it never delivered. Political tension, but ultimately tension between these 2 characters as well.
Yeah.
I have a story about autobiography. I'm not a film critic by all means, but I use Letterboxd almost obsessively, and I like to write my own reviews, which are not reviews by all means. It's just puns, right? and I wrote my review for autobiography is "Who's Your Daddy Now?" and that review got 14 likes. It's my most popular review. So yeah, that's my one link to autobiography.
Wow.
Yeah.
Amazing. Yeah, I think one thing that came up from our discussion also was how I think autobiography was like also a product of a lot of film labs, and we were thinking about how that seems to be the way that a lot of these films develop that kind of polish and sort of universal acceptance by the film community. Because like if you look through their list of like labs they've been to, it's like they've pretty much been around the world. Like at every stage there's a development lab, they went for a production lab, post-production. And I think we were talking about that's why the film was as successful as it was, because it like also went to TIFF right after Venice, and it won quite a lot of awards on the circuit. And I think that seems to be the way forward for a lot of Southeast Asian films. Yeah, and they sort of like, that's a way of like financing the film. Also, you win awards here and there, you get partners on board through these labs. So
before we transition to the next topic of discussion, which is streaming, do you have any advice for someone who is looking to write about film criticism and, hopefully get paid for it?
Yeah, I mean, the reality is it's an industry that's under a lot of change. A lot of full-time jobs are no longer exist. A lot of it is based, runs on the work of freelancers these days. It's an industry that has a lot of exploitation, um, as with other parts of the film industry. And like you have to be very careful. And I think I've always grappled with, writing for free. Like, I mean, for Cindy, when I started, they write, you have to write for free. I mean, they give you press passes and all that to go for and watch films, but you write for free. And I think I set myself a goal not to write for free the minute I graduated. So I was like, everything's fine before that, because I'm still a student, I'm still learning the craft, I'm still embedding myself in the industry. But I think after that, I made it a point to like chase, after publications that paid. So I think I would say like to people who are, want to go on this path, like sort of set those boundaries for yourself. Maybe give yourself a timeline and all. It's hard to run away from the fact that you have to write for free. It's very hard. Not everyone, it sometimes draws people from a certain like privileged background and all that to be able to do that. And I think I would say just be careful with that. Set boundaries for yourself, set timelines, make sure that even if you're doing something for free, you get something out of it, whether it's, like you expand your portfolio in a way that you want to push it towards, get access to like dinners, parties and all that because you can grow your network that way. But I would say it's very hard because, especially in Singapore, when I think about the context, there's no publication like Cindy really right now. And I think I sort of mourn that space that it gave to a lot of its young writers because, I think it was a very formative experience. It was a very transformative experience as well. I think Asian Film Archive still sort of uses a lot of young writers and they pay, so that would probably be my first sort of stop. Otherwise, you can look abroad. People are very interested in Asian cinema and TV now. Think about what you're good at, what your niche is, because sometimes you might realize that you're better writing for trades versus film like a publication like Sight and Sound. But some people might be better writing for Sight and Sound versus a trade. See what you gravitate towards. You can do all. You don't have to like pigeonhole yourself. But see what you gravitate towards. I would say people who are very specific and have niches and specific genres that they're very good at. Maybe you are very knowledgeable about Thai horror or Indonesian independent films or from a certain period, things like that. I think you would do very well, like doing film criticism, because that sort of rewards a lot of deep expertise. If you're very good at like maybe sound, you come from a sound background and you can comment on that, then maybe criticism will be something you're interested in. If you like to like talk to a lot of people, kaypoh, and listen to everything that's happening in the industry, maybe you might want a trade or like read the trades and see if that is something that you gravitate towards. Yeah, and if you're in Singapore, definitely apply to like the Young Critics program because it's a wonderful place to sort of start. I got my start there. Many people got their start there. Even Sei-Peng here, he's contributing to this podcast. So and then apply to the Far East Film Festival's program. It's called Campus. They run it in like April to May, I think around that time. And then a lot of other programs. I think Rotterdam used to run like a critics program, Locarno. So you have to find community. You have to find ways to like find your way into the industry, and just talk to people and get publications. You get one or two clips in a publication that leads to another 2 or 3 clips. So I think that's the sort of advice I would give.
For to help our listeners better understand the industry climate of film criticism, just now you mentioned that sadly a lot of full-time roles are being converted to either freelance or part-time. Why is that happening? And maybe you could also speak to the largest state of film criticism, maybe in Asia or in Southeast Asia right now.
Yeah, I mean, simple answer is no money lah. Newsrooms are running out of money. But it's also because, it's not just a film journalism or film criticism thing. It's the news industry as a whole, right? Because, they used to be able to sell a lot of ads in like the print editions, but now everyone's reading things online, right? So then you have to sell ads online, but then that means that, you know, you have to have headlines and articles that are what we would call clickbaits, right? So that there's traffic. So I think because of that, the whole clientele has shifted, audience has shifted. And because of that, you know, they are not selling as many ads in like print copies, and that's where like most of the money came from. So yeah, it's just a lot of factors, because as film journalism, you're at the crossroads of both the news industry and the film industry, and both are very, very unstable right now. So you just get whacked from all sides lah. Yeah, but I mean, people will always read stories, and people will always want to digest thought out, you know, pieces and responses to film. So there will always be a space for that. It's just that what does that space look like now? That's, you know, changing all the time. I mean, there's video essays as well, right? And there's film podcasts. You know, there are different ways of like digesting films these days. So I think they've like the desire will always be there. It's just that it has migrated into different forms and different spaces.
When you're writing for this certain traits, right? Because you mentioned about clickbaits, and you know, I recall what there's a lot of articles, even like in the Telegraph, right? Like I remember there's this article. I couldn't read it because it's you have to pay a membership to read it. But the headline caption goes like, "Oh, Sofia Coppola speaks about her daughter's TikTok debut, something, and why she still can't watch The Godfather 3." You know, like there's a craft to kind of, oh, okay, these 3 elements make me want to read, even though the article is pretty much covering Priscilla, the latest film. But you know, there's all these little things. So after, you know, writing for like Hollywood Reporter and you know and other publications, do they kind of like hone that into you as well? It's like, hey, you gotta kind of curate this this things.
Yeah, I mean, one thing is that usually the writer doesn't really get to write the headline. Like I will usually put a suggested headline at the top of my article, but usually the editors, they know what works best for the publication, so usually they will like change it. Yeah, so but in a way I do feel the pressure sometimes to like, you know, if there's a certain celebrity attached to the film, to like put a name in the headline and in the first few words, because that would, you know, increase the sort of clicks. Yeah, so sometimes I sometimes question, you know, that sort of motivation, because for me, like I have the privilege of having another, like, you know, I have a day job, and this is just something that I do on the side, that I freelance in, so maybe I'm not as dependent on it for money. And I think my sort of philosophy towards it after the last few years is that, you know, like for example, if I'm writing 5 articles for Forbes that month, maybe 2 or 3 would be very, you know, they call it SEO, sort of like search engine optimization oriented. So talking to celebrities, or, you know, a very popular film or something that's trendy, and then I leave 2 that I, you know, don't mind sacrificing some clicks for, because I want to at least play a small role in like moving the needle towards like independent cinema, or like really good but undiscovered work that still falls under the remit of Asian cinema and TV. And I don't want to just add to that sort of churn online. I think if that's, you know, what I do all the time, I think I'll be very disappointed. And I want to like leave space for it. So that's how I sort of approach that sort of, you know, quota per month. I you know, do a few, you know, for the clicks, not really just for the clicks, but I try to find a middle ground between the clicks and stories I truly care about. I think that's my philosophy towards it.
Sarah, given that Cindy is more or less defunct, are you planning to start something on your own? Because we had a very brief conversation about, you know, the lack of film venues as in film writing venues in Singapore. You mentioned there's AFA's magazine. And I think I think there's also cinema, right? SINEMA.
Yeah, I've read that.
Yeah, I think besides these 2 websites, I don't think there are any other venues for writers to publish on. So do you have plans to start something on your own?
I think currently, like, I know I don't really have the bandwidth for it, because I want to do it in a sustainable way, right? You don't want to like start something and then it burns out in 2 months. Then, you know, it's sort of like, you know, cements the cycle of like this doesn't work, there's no space for it, there's no money for it. And I really want it
Yeah.
to be like financially well backed. I want writers to be paid for it, for their work, and then it's like, do I come on to like edit and all that? But then I'm managing all these other things in my life as well. So I think
Mm.
I'm willing, if there are like maybe a group of people who want to run it, to like support and like give it every sort of, whether it's a contact or advice, or whether like editing a few articles a month. Like I will give it that sort of, that's what I feel like I can give at this point. um but maybe in a few years, if no one has started it by then, yeah, like to create something that would really sort of provide space. And I know there's a huge sort of desire and huge need for it, because even this time when I went back to the youth critics program under the festival, the mentor there, Phoebe, yeah, she invited me to like sort of talk to this year's batch. I mean last year's batch, and I think so many of them are so enthusiastic about writing. And the question that keeps coming up is like, after this program ends, where do I go? Like, who do I write for? And I mean, I told those who are still in school to like write for their student publications and all that, because at least it's a way of learning to work in a newsroom. It's a way of getting your work out there. um and student publications can be a massive force. I've seen some, like, sometimes I see really good writing in these student publications. So I think it's a really good way to start. But then I'm like, if you're working, then where do you write? Like, I think it's a massive, massive problem in Singapore. And I mean, at this point, you have to look. The reason why I looked overseas is because there were very few avenues in Singapore to do it. Yeah, and that's why I pushed myself to write for overseas publications. But I think we need something to call our own, so we can decide what we cover and all that, and it doesn't come from like that sort of European or like American sort of perspective. Because
Yeah.
I think that's what I felt like. Am I replicating that sort of like Eurocentric gaze sometimes? Because I know only certain films who have won certain awards at certain European festivals would be of interest to these publications. So I'm still, when I cover them and I write about them, I'm still replicating that gaze. And then I'm I wonder, if we get to define for ourselves what should be covered, what deserves space and a voice, like what Cindy gave, to even short filmmakers, budding filmmakers and all that. What would that look like? And I would love for, if anyone listening to this has a lot of money to give, maybe we can start a conversation. Yeah.
Yeah, and I also want to shout out to Nang magazine.
Yeah.
I forgot to mention that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I haven't been keeping up with their output, but I read the first like 2 or 3 editions that they put out, and they are
Yeah.
great.
Sorry,
Sorry?
just a quick thing to add. I think what they're doing is like great, because they don't. I mean, I think they said they only do like 10 editions or something like that, right? And I think that makes it quite sustainable in a way. You don't try and like outlast what you've been given, and I think you like really focus on doing a very good job with those 10 editions and all that. And I know like David runs that, and he's doing like a great job along with all the guest editors as well.
Yeah, it's the film critics version of Tarantino and Tsai Ming-liang's. I'll just do 10 films, 10 solid films, and I can retire.
Yeah.
All right, let's move on to streaming. So you've wrote quite a number of articles for the publications that we just mentioned, Forbes, Deadline, THR, about the streaming landscape in Asia. And you covered both the major US streamers, of course, Netflix and Amazon being two of the biggest, as well as the streamers in Asia. For example, iQIYI from China and KT Studio Genie from Korea. So could you just give us a high-level macro overview of the streaming landscape in Asia? Like where do you see the pieces fitting in, and why suddenly all of these streamers are converging to Southeast Asia in particular?
Yeah, wow. That's a very difficult question.
One at a time.
Yeah.
Do you know how many countries there are in Asia? No, I mean, like there are all those American streamers, right? You have Disney, you have Netflix, you have Amazon, sort of operating the space, employing different strategies to sort of cement themselves like in certain domestic markets, and you have ITE, View, um, I mean even locally we have like Vitsy in a way, doing a lot of short films, sort of filling, um, sort of building their sort of the hits that they got in the region because they've been around, before the American streamers. So I think there's a lot of competition for like, creators and voices and talent that they want to work with. And I think why they're so interested in Southeast Asia is because they see Manila is a populous region that is not as, saturated as other regions that they've already been in, like, Latin America or Europe. They've been in there for a while. Yeah, so I think they just see the money there. And I guess it's a region that has that sort of rich cultural heritage. I mean, you have filmmakers like, especially from like Thailand, Philippines, Indonesia, who have long found a lot of success on the independent film circuit. And I guess there's a lot of there are certain populations that also engage very enthusiastically, whether it's through like sort of like as fans of certain directors and talent, or they buy a lot of merchandise, things like that. So I think a lot of these companies sort of see the that sort of financial promise in the region.
Yeah. And you also wrote a piece titled Singapore is Becoming a Key Regional Co-Producer. And in a way, in that piece, you highlighted that there's all these Southeast Asian countries, Indonesia, Vietnam, Philippines, and then there is Singapore. But the role that Singapore plays is very different from the role that the other countries play. Could you just roughly describe the thesis of that article?
Yeah, I mean Singapore's in a very difficult position, right? Because um none of the streamers are interested to, sort of expand what they already have in this market. We are pretty much saturated. Like whoever wants to subscribe to Netflix has already subscribed, and like that's that. You're not gonna like convince more people.
Yeah, they don't have to make a local show to like, hey.
Yeah, and so the local show people don't want to subscribe.
Yeah.
Haven't we? It's so sad. Yeah, we watch so much international shows already that there's very little sort of impetus, which I feel quite sad about sometimes, but I still get it from like a money perspective. Yeah, so that's one. And then number two is, we don't have those like sweeping vistas and landscapes that other countries have where we can say, okay, at least come and film here. And then, sort of build expertise, and through like the, mingling of like local crew and all that. There are very, very, very few shows that will come here to film because they're like really expensive, and we also don't have like a lot of like geographical features that they'll just go Malaysia, if they wanted to do that.
Correct.
Yeah, even we also go to Malaysia. So the films. So yeah, so I think we're in a difficult position. But the interesting thing is a lot of the APAC headquarters of like the streamers are based in Singapore. So you sort of have this critical mass of at least like very corporate people, and important people are based here. And I think that has given our local industry a lot of benefits as well, at least through networks. And I think the thesis for the article was also talking about how Singapore is navigating these challenges, right? Because so I think the focus was on, if you can bring money to the table, which most of the time comes through like IMDA and their grants, if you can bring money to the table, these producers and all that can secure, they can retain like IP, or add some creative control and elements to the film or to the animation, or to a TV series, right? Because if you're bringing money to the table, you have creative control. And I think one of the interviewees mentioned that they don't want to just be a service provider, right? We're not like a finishing post-production finishing hub. We want to add to the story as well. So they didn't want to be just a service provider. They also want to be a creative. So I think the article is also exploring that trend while also acknowledging that there are sort of constraints that the Singapore industry sort of works within.
And maybe we can talk about why the streamers are coming to Southeast Asia, and what is it about Southeast Asia they really see in?
Yeah, so I think I wrote an article like late last year for THR about streamers working with independent film, like filmmakers who have established themselves on an independent circuit versus, traditional TV directors. And whether this was creating like a prestige TV wave because you have all these like really like cerebral shows, high production value, and a lot of, has really nice sort of aesthetic. Yeah, and I think like especially like the example that I used was like Camila Andini, who had made, Nana, and before that also made Uni, which was I think really popular as well. Yeah, and why they're working with them, and the sort of I think I'm interested in the impact that this will have in the long term, right? Because on one hand, these independent filmmakers are being given the biggest budgets they've ever worked with to make some of the shows that they never got to make. I mean, Camila was talking about how, like the Making Cigarette Girl, the one that's on Netflix, took her, they wanted to make the story, I think like 7-8 years ago, but they never could find a space to make it. It's too expensive to turn it into a film. But Netflix sort of filled that gap that has long existed, And yeah, but I also wonder in the long term if you have all these independent filmmakers locked up making with all these sort of deals with streamers, what that impact will have on the independent film landscape. Because you can only, you can't be shooting like 5 films at the same time. You can work on certain stories, but you definitely your bandwidth is limited. And I wonder how that will affect local film culture as well. And even like the price points that people are willing to work. I mean, not just that, but also the sort of how it'll impact like independent film budgets as well. Yeah, because another one is Soro Sukum, who's in Thailand, and he worked on like Memoria. He produced Memoria, but he also worked on a Netflix series recently that was recently premiered. I think it's called 60 in 9. Yeah, so but he said he's going back into independent films. So I think things are still very fluid, and as filmmakers, they see themselves as people telling stories, whatever the medium or form it is. But I also wonder what the long-term implications of this.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts?
I get your point, because it's ultimately 2 very different modes of storytelling.
Yeah.
And when you watch like Cigarette Girl is a great show.
Yeah.
It keeps you wanting to watch more, and just on a basic aesthetic level, it's nice to watch. There's all these charismatic stars as well. But if you watch her films like Uni, right, it is such a it moves on a different verve, a different speed as well. And you can't help to think that, because TV, right, it has such a structure, and no matter how strong your voice is, you fall into this template a little bit, right? And that kind of affects it, the little things, how you frame your shots, how you break down a scene, right? Because the speed is totally different. To give you one example, like even recently Wong Kar-wai, his new TV series, Blossoms, right, finally released in China. It's a 30-episode TV series, right? And I was speaking to Seping that day, that show has all the trademark aesthetics of Wong Kar-wai, right? But it's moving at such a breakneck speed. It's like watching In the Mood for Love times 5. The shots cut back and forth like fast, like 5 times faster than his films, and you realize that that is television for you. No matter how revolutionary you are a voice in cinema, right? TV writing, it moves at that speed, and you have to kind of go with it. So I get what you mean by like, in the long run, if you keep making deals, with the streaming service, and you do a film, and I think not only TV series, if you were to do a film as well, there is, because you are making it for small screen, right? The streaming platform, there is a different vibe to it. There is a different how should I say, viewing conditions for your audience as well. So the script is gonna be a little bit different and everything.
Yeah. And I feel like certain filmmakers, they grow in their craft and in their sort of belief as a filmmaker through having a captive audience that is in the theater, right?
Yeah.
Whereas, if you put something on Netflix or Disney, you know that people are like, scrolling through their phones on social media while watching your show. They might be fast forwarding it at certain points. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, so there are a lot of things you can't control. And I mean, that's both the beauty and the horror of TV. People might be having like a family dinner and then even though it says Netflix, and like this number of like viewership hours, people could just be
Yeah.
having like a family dinner and that's like in the background and like no one actually.
Hey, let's watch Maestro while we are having dinner.
Fill
Yeah.
the room. So yeah, so I think these filmmakers have built their careers on having captive audiences in theaters who are there sitting down and absorbing their work and respond to it, whether on Letterboxd or in hallways and cafes and things like
Yeah.
that. And sometimes they build a sort of following through that. So I wonder if it's healthy. I mean, they are definitely growing their audiences, which is like all the power to them. But I wonder if like what it means for their craft, at a large scale, without having this sort of captive audience.
Yeah, I think as a start, it's good. Yeah, yeah, it's definitely good. If it's a one-time thing or two-time thing, I would say there's way more positives.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
We have spoken about Netflix and Amazon. Let's talk about the Asian streamers, iQIYI and Viu. How are their market strategy into Southeast Asia? Is it similar or different from the Western streamers? And how do they operate similarly and differently?
Yeah, I think one thing is that they normalized like ads-based viewing for way before Netflix even started a discussion about it. Like some of us, we prefer sitting through a 30-second ad than like paying a single $1 for subscription. So I think Viu like did that for the longest time. So they respond to that sort of market sort of peculiarities for each country. There are certain countries that people prefer paying a subscription. There are some countries where people prefer just leaving the ads running. But I think there's one key difference. Like they did it way before like the American streamers even thought about it. Yeah, and I think some of them, they have a head start. They've been around longer. They have a loyal sort of base. But I think most of them, they say they have this like freemium model where there's like that sort of ads tier and then they also have like a paid tier. So that's sort of how they operate. Yeah, but I think because most of the work the things I write about focus on the American streamers, so I think that's still what I know most about. Yeah.
Right. For our listeners and for myself who might not know, because I have never logged into iQIYI and Viu. So if I were to log in, like what kind of content would I expect to see on iQIYI and Viu?
I've watched quite a bit of Viu. The ads. I mean, I sit through the ads and all that. I think to watch a lot of like sometimes the Korean dramas that you don't get on the streamers or on like, because I also have like a KBS World subscription, so sometimes some shows don't make it there. So I think I've definitely watched quite a few like variety shows through Viu. I don't think you need to sign up for an account if you just want to like go through the ads as well. Yeah, so that's how I've used it. Yeah.
So Viu, the content on Viu are primarily Korean dramas and Korean variety shows?
Yeah,
there's
but
a
I
lot of
think
Hong
they have
Kong stuff as well.
Yeah, they have Chinese shows.
I see.
Yeah, I think there's some Thai stuff also. I think if I'm not wrong, Taiwanese maybe. Yeah.
Hong Kong is releasing a lot of TV series on Viu.
I see. Interesting. I think going back to Singapore and how we're trying to eke out maybe a sustainable position in the Southeast Asian landscape. In the article, I quote, Singapore's position in the regional content industry is unique, with many overseas studios seeking partnerships with Singaporean company, but not prioritizing the domestic market at all, which we discussed just now. But at the same time, we have our local filmmakers like Ochre Pictures, and you wrote in one of your Forbes articles how Ochre Pictures is working with some Korean studios.
Yeah.
And also in another separate piece, you mentioned Mokachai. They're now going down the content and production route, and they are also working with some Korean studios.
Yeah.
Like, could you just like give us some context of why this kind of, or why and how these kind of partnerships are being formed, and what's the larger goal behind these collaborations?
Yeah, I can't really speak on the specificities of how, people at Mokachai, Ochre Pictures, or Beach House Pictures actually form those connections. Maybe, most of the time people meet people at festivals, markets, labs, parties. So I don't know about the specificities of that, but I think they're doing it because I think Singapore creators still have a lot to bring to the table in terms of the sort of wide sort of knowledge. Maybe sometimes it's language. Maybe it's a Singapore thing, right? Like if you look at other industries, we're always this sort of connector in the region, right? So I think it's similar in film in some ways. We have that sort of entrepreneurial, enterprising, hardworking sort of spirit, and that I think is still valued, even though we don't bring the domestic market to the table the same way that an Indonesian producer would bring or a Filipino producer would bring. So I think that's how like things are playing out. Everyone's trying to find at least one or two key partners in the big sort of industries, Japan, Korea, Taiwan, because they also bring money to the table through like government grants, financing. I mean, Ochre Pictures when they when they also served on a local shoot of like Little Women, it was on Netflix as well. There was like a Singapore shoot, so they also collaborated with them. So I'm sure like conversations continue, and that's how they can sign like a memorandum of understanding a few months later, right? Because
Right.
they do a good job, people want to work with them again. I think that's how usually things play out.
Yeah, it seems like though when they collaborate with these foreign studios, they aren't making Singapore centric content. They're making very Korean flavored content.
Yeah.
Like so, for example, with Mokachai, I think they made a series that I think I saw a little bit of called
Venus in Mars, right?
Venus in Mars.
Yeah.
I think I watched a bit of it on I think YouTube, and it's so Korean.
Yeah.
If you didn't tell me Mokachai was involved, I thought it was some the typical CJ or some huge
Right.
conglomerate. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think at the end of the day, there's still like independent cinema is still the heartbeat of culture in some ways, because you have all these collaborations, and I mean you can always cast a local actor, bring those sort of talent on board, and that's sort of the contribution that we can bring on a regional level. But at the same time, if you're looking for like Singapore stories and things that will resonate and sort of have that sort of permanence, hopefully, in our cultural landscape, you have to look towards, independent cinema, what local filmmakers are doing, that they still fight to do, sometimes on very shoestring budgets. And that's why I still believe in having, like a local broadcaster and like making local shows and all that. Because at the end of the day, like this is what we have and we have to support it. And we can only like try and improve what we have, because you can have all these collaborations, and I'm very like happy that these filmmakers, and these production studios, production companies all have these resources and these connections to, powerhouses in the region. I think they're advancing the Singapore industry in very important ways. But I think, it's not mutually exclusive to also like grow, local culture and local voices. And that's why I like love watching like short films by local filmmakers and all that, because most of the time it's so like, untouched by all these sort of market forces and all that, for better or for worse. And I think that's where I really find what people are thinking about these days. And it's so important to preserve spaces for short filmmakers and independent films, and to like develop that sort of film literacy from young to learn to watch these films, because I mean at the start it's difficult. Like some films move so slow, and then you're like, what am I supposed to get from this? But in that slowness, it's also making a statement and it's making an artistic choice. I think that's why I think the biggest place we need to grow in is like film literacy, learning to watch different kinds of films.
Yeah, which goes back to what we started out talking about, which is
Yeah.
like film appreciation and film criticism.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And I think let's start to wrap up our conversation. Like, is there any, in a way, parting words that you want to share? Like any I don't know if heartfelt is the right word, but
any please.
Please.
yeah. But like we Sarah, we are giving you the space now, right, to say your innermost thoughts about film appreciation and film writing.
Wow.
Yeah. Before we move on to the quick fire round.
Okay.
Yeah.
One thing is that I think we shouldn't underestimate ourselves.
Yeah.
Like maybe we're not going to be that industry that churns out like 50 films a year, like blockbusters, bringing in like $100 million. Like maybe we're not going to be that industry. We never will be. But we cannot underestimate ourselves in terms of what we can bring to the table. And there's certain things that that we have strengths in. Like our industry is small, yeah, but because of that we support each other a lot, because like I remember like going back even to that Cannes Film Festival program that I went for in my school, and then like I still remember bumping into like Wei Jie outside, I think one of the cinema theaters, and then he was so warm, and I felt like, so I was like a young student then, and I was like, oh, and then we had coffee together with his wife Liz, and then even like there bumping to Vincent, Jeremy, and then who I think was also on this podcast, right? And then Vincent was on this podcast, yeah, and like how much they are so generous in their sharing, like even though at that point in time I could barely bring anything to the table then, but they're willing to like give that advice and tell me how the industry works and all that. And I think that's a strength that we cannot overlook. Like people do look out for each other. And I remember American friends sort of commenting like, wow, I would never be able to talk to American film, like, and any American filmmaker or industry person like that at a film festival, like they wouldn't be able to approach someone like that. And I'm like, wow, it's like as a Singaporean, you meet another Singaporean at a festival, most of the time you can just, start a conversation, and, people are very supportive. I think for the most part, we do have a very sort of supportive government and agencies and bodies and film commission to like really, will get behind filmmakers. And I think just as long as we work on film education and growing audiences, I feel like that's the biggest space we need to work on. I think, don't ever underestimate ourselves in any aspect of the industry, whether it's like producing or writing or, being part of like programming, things like that. We can forge our own path in our own way.
Well said.
Yay!
Yeah, and with that, let's move on to the final section of this episode, which is the quick fire round.
Okay.
John, you want to kick off first?
Okay. Quick fire round is basically when we give our guests like two choices for the most part, and then you choose. Yeah. So our first quick fire question: do you prefer Indonesian or Thai films?
Cannot comment. If not, we'll get into trouble.
Okay, can skip. No problem. Okay. Okay, the next one. What's your favorite Singapore TV show?
Oh my goodness! Like honestly, like Phua Chu Kang. Just so fun. Yeah, when I'm overseas, sometimes I just like put on a little PCK and I'm like back home. Yeah, but another thing I really like is the news as well. That was on Channel 5 way back. I love the news.
Right.
I wish we still had it.
Okay.
What's your favorite web series? Singapore web series.
I don't watch that much, or maybe I cannot think of any off the top of my head. I mean, I watch a fair amount of like Mr. Brown and some of the stuff that like Benjamin King was like putting out. Yeah. I kind of like still wish we had the news. I feel like that would be a good web series for these days. Yeah.
Yeah, it should come back as like me watch content.
Yeah, like sometimes I just
Yeah.
put
Yeah.
on some like the news as well, and I feel like
Just
right
10
after.
minutes per episode and it's fine. Yeah, they should do
Yeah,
that. Yeah.
And I think Annette Lee should replace Michelle Chong as the new newscaster.
Oh yeah.
Interesting choice.
I think
They
yeah.
should talk it out. Okay.
All right,
The
next.
next one. This is a bit of a lengthy question, but it's quite an interesting one. So hear me out. If I'm a Singapore filmmaker coming to you, and if you are a streaming commissioner, I have 2 Singapore hyper local series ideas. Which will you choose? The first one, a period love in post-war Singapore story about a biscuit factory tycoon and a noodle store owner who lost his husband in the war. Think of it in the vein of Cigarette Girl. So that's number one.
Okay.
Or a modern urban tale of kinship about a down on luck faded private detective and his Gen Z assistant from the wrong side of tracks as they tackle the most unorthodox infidelity cases in Singapore. Think of it as or something like the Korean show My Mister meets a little bit of Corrida. Which one will you pick as a commissioner?
Oh, the ideal world where we have good budgets, the period piece. I don't know.
Okay.
I just love period pieces, and I think in Singapore
Right.
we don't really get to see a lot of it because of budget.
Yeah.
I would love to see one. Our
Right.
history is so rich, and I wish we could see more of that on TV.
Maybe because you from your experience covering streamers, what is it about streamers do they see in like a show set in period setting?
I'm not sure. Like, I think because it was adapted from a novel, so I think streamers love working off adaptations. So at least there's that sort of checkbox, where you have a existing audience for that piece already,
Right,
a proven
right.
audience for that piece. And I think it's different. They want to bring something different, right? Because if they replicate just what local broadcasters do or what independent film does, then they are not really editing anything, and they can't sort of get more subscribers that way. So I think for them, they're just looking to do something different. And most of the time, what is different is what filmmakers haven't been able to do for 10 years on independent film circuit. So I think that's naturally how things play out. I mean, the best example is Squid Game, right? I mean, the director was talking about how he was rejected by all the local broadcasters, years ago, trying to make that. And that's exactly what Netflix scooped up. So
right. Cool. Siping, you want to take the next one?
Yeah. So this one just popped in my head, so I'm going to ask.
Okay.
In an ideal world, Sarah, you have just published your first your first film publication of film essays. So it's like your Neng. But what would you call your own film magazine?
I remember, flashback. I remember we were trying to, a bunch of us alumni from SGIF, we were trying to start a film magazine. I think it was Brendan that sort of suggested it. I don't know.
Brendan? Oh.
Yeah, but we had, the name is it was called Sing Nima.
Oh my god.
Yeah.
I will watch that. I will read that.
It's kind of funny, but a bit offensive. But I think that was the point, that film criticism
was
offensive. Even a Facebook group.
Yes, I think I was in that group. I remember that title.
Massive flashback, 7 years ago. Okay, yeah. So
Sarah, you should actually do it.
The idea has been but
let's reignite it.
Yeah.
Okay, Sing Nima is copyrighted. Okay, no one who is listening to this should use it. Nice.
Cool.
Okay.
Next one. Siping, you want to do that?
Yeah, sure. So Sarah, would you rather write about a film market event, like an industry event, or write film reviews, or write long-form film essays?
I don't know. All are fun. But I think covering film market is quite fun as well because you get to talk to a lot of people. I think
Hmm.
reviews are challenging and intellectually stimulating, but they're also, I think, the most solitary you'll ever be as as a writer on film. And I think at this point, I like, going around talking to people,
Right.
seeing what's up, what's in the pipeline. So maybe like a market piece, yeah.
Hmm.
Mm.
Okay.
Nice.
All right. The next question. Which Southeast Asian filmmaker do you like to see do a series of film for Netflix?
Wow, on the spot. Oh, I have to say a Singapore filmmaker, right?
No lah.
I feel
No
the
need,
moral
no need.
obligation to.
Okay, you can name one Singapore filmmaker and another Southeast Asian filmmaker.
Okay, for a Singapore filmmaker, I want it to be like something very funny because I feel that I don't know whether it'll work for a streamer because humor is local. But you see, like what Timo did in Indonesia, like with the Big Four, something like that, like a really because it did so well on Netflix. And I feel like our strength, like in our cinema, is our humor. Like that's the only thing that I feel like will bring local audiences to something, because you can't find our humor anywhere else, right? Humor is so local, and that's something you cannot get from international fare. And maybe something funny. And Southeast Asian filmmaker, they're all making such good stuff, and I know a few of them already have deals, so not off the top of my head. I'll just keep watching what's out there.
Okay.
Yeah.
But interesting, you make the reference to the Big Four. Yeah. If you talk about Singapore, I think it's probably like two, three filmmakers that could do that. Yeah.
We need a Big Four. Yeah.
Right.
I feel like that would feel like more up our alley. Yeah.
Cool.
Okay. The next question, I already know what your answer is gonna be. Because we're gonna ask, if you had to subscribe to one streamer, who would it be? And I'm guessing you probably can't answer that.
Okay, can laugh. I think if I could only subscribe to one.
Rewatch.
Only right answer. That would be like Disney lah. Because you can basically get so much with it, right? You get like Nat Geo, so you can watch documentaries, but you also can watch like crime stuff. A little bit.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and then you get to watch like all the cute like Pixar stuff. You can like weep through like a lot of their films. So I feel like in terms of just the range and the library they have, like it's hard to beat Disney. If I only could subscribe to one.
I think Disney, right? Because recently they are, what do you call that? Like it's in public domain, right? Mickey.
Oh yeah, Mickey. All the horror movies.
They should like just to like be, I don't know, be in your face, right? They will just put one section with all this public domain versions of Mickey's in Disney in the Disney platform. Yeah.
That'd be funny. But I think they're also quite, like PG, so I think some of the horror stuff.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Yeah.
All right. And now we are at our final question. Which film critic do you most admire and why?
Hard to choose. But I think I have a lot of respect for Justin Chang, who was at Variety for the longest time, but then moved to LA Times. He has a massive Twitter following as well, and he keeps it very lighthearted. But his reviews are very succinct. He can say a lot with very few words. And he's also a very generous person. I remember meeting him in Busan as well, and he's a very, very generous person and very, very warm person. So I think that's someone I really respect. I mean, there are a lot of voices out there that I love to read. But I think if I had to choose one, it would be Justin Chang.
Right. Cool. Seping, who's the film critic you like? You admire the most?
Wow. I think... Can I name a dead critic?
Can. Why not?
I used to read a lot of Pauline Kael.
Oh yeah, she's great. I love her.
Yeah. And at Library at Esplanade, they have 5 or 6 of her books, and I remember just reading like one book of hers per week.
Yeah.
And I think the way she wrote, and the period of films that she covered was also the films that I really love. Like she reviewed a lot of like Jean-Luc Godard's films. She reviewed a lot of, the art house films that were coming from Europe in the 70s, like Antonioni and his peers. Yeah, so the way she described the films, even when she hate the films, is so well written.
Yep.
How about John?
Nice. I like quite a few. I like Scott Tobias, Michael Phillips, and Pauline Kael as well. Yeah, I in my free time I like to read Armond White articles. Armond White, even though I think 90% of the time he's wrong, but he writes his almost delusional opinions really well. So I get a kick out of reading that. Yeah.
I think I also like reading David Ehrlich as well, IndieWire. I think he might be, I don't know whether he's still writing.
Right.
Yeah, but I listen to his podcast as well, and I feel like most of the time he's pretty on, like he's spot on with films as well.
Cool.
Yeah, I quite like Richard Brody also.
I find myself disagreeing with him most of the time.
I think the little annoying thing I find about Brody is he will use whatever occasion there is, right, to reference Godard, to talk about Godard in some way. Yeah, sometimes it gets a bit too much. Yeah. All right, and with that, thank you so much for spending the time with us, Sarah.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, we really enjoyed this conversation, and we really look forward to the first issue of Cinema.
Come on, run it.
Let's do it, man.
Yeah. All right. Thank you all, and see you at the next episode. Bye-bye.